In the words of Governor General Georges Vanier,
"The Legion is not a veterans' club where old men, out of touch with modern problems, meet to reminisce and berate the younger generation. The Legion is a living tradition which keeps alive the form of service and patriotism, and in doing so adds new worth and meaning to all it touches."
The story of the Royal Canadian Legion begins in August 1914, when the United Kingdom declared war on Germany and the Dominion of Canada entered the Great War. In early October, the first Canadian troops and their equipment sailed across the Atlantic in a large convoy escorted by warships. Some 33,000 men arrived in England for further training and were shipped to France in February 1915. 26-year-old Georges Vanier, raised in Montreal and perfectly bilingual, became an officer in the Canadian Army and helped create an all-Francophone unit, the 22nd Infantry Battalion. During 1915, Vanier and his men traveled to England to prepare for war. Meanwhile, the 1st Division went into action in Belgium, near the town of Ypres. Canadian soldiers first experienced the horrors of trench warfare at the Second Battle of Ypres in April 1915, when the Germans used chlorine gas against the Canadian lines. The commanding officer of the 2nd Canadian Infantry Brigade, Brigadier General Arthur Currie, was praised because his headquarters had been gassed and burnt, but he stayed cool and improvised with a fluid defense that stopped the German advance. The reputation of Canada as a solid fighting force had begun. In May 1916, Lieutenant General Sir Julian Byng took command of the Canadian Corps. Byng had showed great talent and skills as a senior commander during the early part of the war. When he arrived with the Canadian troops, he was rapidly admired and trusted by the men, who nicknamed themselves Byng Boys. During the spring of 1917, the Canadian Corps were tasked to assault Vimy Ridge. This 7-kilometer-long crest had been a major Allied target during 2 previously ill-fated offensives. Vimy was plastered with trenches and shell craters and manned by a garrison of about 40,000 German troops. On Easter Monday, April 9th, the weather was cold and the clouds were low.
But nothing could fully prepare the infantry, who went over the top at 5:30 in the morning on the 9th of April. Those 15,000 infantry who surged forward, followed and supported by thousands of other soldiers. And the attack on Vimy Ridge, which really raged over those 4 days, was extremely costly. It cost Canada 10,602 casualties. And the first day of battle, the 9th of April, where most of those casualties fall, is the single bloodiest day in Canadian military history.
The next day, amid snow and sleet, the 3rd and last German defensive line was reached, and the entire ridge had fallen by April 12th. After the battle, Byng was promoted, and Currie replaced him as the commander of the Canadian Corps. Currie went on to win the Battle of Lens at Hill 70, the Battle of Passchendaele, and to lead the Canadians through the 100 days from August to November 1918. Acts of bravery abounded during this period, such as those by Major Georges Vanier, fighting with the 22nd French-Canadian Battalion. In August 1918, he was shot in the chest while leading an attack and wounded in both legs from artillery. His right leg later was amputated because of shell fragments. For his gallantry in battle, Vanier was awarded the 2nd highest decoration for valor, the Distinguished Service Order. Lieutenant Milton Gregg of the Royal Canadian Regiment, a 26-year-old native of New Brunswick, won the highest Commonwealth Award for gallantry in battle, the Victoria Cross, in September 1918. Both men later distinguished themselves by helping the cause of war veterans and the Legion.
Canada mobilized a massive army in the First World War. From a nation of 8 million, we had 620,000 Canadians in uniform. About 66,000 died during the course of the war or in its immediate aftermath. Another 172,000 were wounded. They were wounded in body, in mind, in spirit. The country had to take care of them. It created a healthcare system, in effect, to care for these veterans. They also had to take care of the 400,000 or so soldiers who were coming back from overseas. These were citizen soldiers. They were fathers, they were uncles, they were brothers. They came from across this country. They were demobilized for the most part throughout 1919, and there was a fierce debate in Canada as to what was owed these soldiers. They had served their country, they had sacrificed, some of them 5 years of their lives. They had fought for a war that most Canadians believed had been just and had been necessary. And there was a discussion about what and how the Canadian state would care for these soldiers.
In 1917, the first national organization dealing with veterans' issues was formed, in part by Lillian Freiman, nicknamed the Poppy Lady. Of the many fragmented veterans groups in Canada after the war, the Great War Veterans Association became the largest of its kind after only 2 years in existence. Freiman also helped create the Vet Craft Shops in 1919, which employed returning servicemen to make furniture and toys. 2 years later, she crafted the first Canadian poppies in her living room in Ottawa to raise funds for veterans. She became the first woman to be made an honorary life member of the Legion. In 1921, the King of England appointed Baron Byng of Vimy as his Governor-General in Ottawa. Lord Byng selected Georges Vanier as his personal aide-de-camp, a position that Vanier held at Byng's side until 1925. These two former soldiers fully supported the creation of a single powerful veterans organization in Canada. 46 groups attended a National Veterans Unity Conference in Winnipeg in 1925, and the Canadian Legion of the British Empire Services League was born. November 11th was then promoted as a national holiday by the Legion, and the poppy was adopted as the official symbol of remembrance.
The veterans come out of the Unity Conference as one. They're speaking with one voice now, and it's a huge force. And everyone is on the same page in terms of what they want from the government in terms of veterans legislation. But more importantly, in the long term, they're all on the same page that this is not going to be just about veterans legislation. It's going to be about speaking with one voice about, how Canada is going to be shaped in the future. It's a cornerstone of what the Legion becomes.
An Act of Parliament in July 1926 incorporated the Charter of the Legion into the Canadian Constitution, and a Dominion Command was established in Ottawa. The sponsorship of the distribution of poppies was also officially assumed by the Legion. Branches were established in every province and even outside Canada. The Legion's mandate was clear: to provide a strong voice to veterans, to advise the government on their welfare and well-being, to improve pension legislation and benefits for veterans and their families, to give treatment and appeals procedures for those in need, to allow for returned soldiers' insurance, and to help veterans treat tuberculosis, the deadliest disease at the time. Because of the Legion, a new and better War Veterans Allowance Act was voted by Parliament in 1930. In 1920, a public competition was held to select and build monuments dedicated to the Canadian war effort on 8 sites across Belgium and France. Toronto sculptor and designer Walter Allward won praise for his proposal, and the Prime Minister of Canada, William Lyon Mackenzie King, suggested that his design be erected on the top of the ridge at Vimy. Amongst Legion members, the idea of a mass pilgrimage to this new memorial, that was to be unveiled by the King of England, took shape. This proposal was timely because General Sir Arthur Currie had become the Dominion President of the Canadian Legion in 1928.
The Legion was responsible for preparing and planning the Vimy pilgrimage. The government was involved in the official aspects of the ceremony, but it was the Legion itself that mobilized many of its members. And the planning for this was like a military operation. They had to move 6,000 Canadian veterans and their family members across the country. The logistical planning was incredible. They had trains coming from every city that would eventually converge on Montreal, where 6,000 veterans moved onto the ocean liners. They crossed the Atlantic. It was really an incredible marvel of logistics. When they arrived in Europe, they arrived in multiple ports. There were hundreds of buses that transported the veterans to Vimy Ridge. And when they arrived there on the 26th of July, there were between 50 and 100,000 people who were there to mark the unveiling.
The monument was unveiled by King Edward VIII of England in one of his only official acts before abdicating the throne. In 1939, a reigning monarch visited Canada for the first time. The Legion welcomed the new King of England, George VI, during his royal tour. Together with 10,000 veterans, they unveiled the new National War Memorial in Ottawa, and this event solidified the role of the Legion as the guardian of remembrance in Canadian society. At the outbreak of war in September 1939, there were over 175,000 members in the Canadian Legion, with an average age of 49 years old. The growth of the Legion during the Second World War was phenomenal. It provided education, entertainment, recreation, and sports to members of the Canadian Armed Forces at home and abroad. It also eased the reintegration of a new generation of veterans into society.
When I came out, I wanted to belong to something, and that's why I went into the Legion. And I was glad I did, because we need comradeship. And when you come out, you've sort of lost interest in the civistry. Makes all the difference in the world, because you have to find your roots when you come out. And the Legion was there to help in many ways.
The post-war era also brought a new ally and powerful networking partner, the Minister of Veterans Affairs, a position created by Ottawa at the recommendation of the Legion. In 1948, that minister, the Honourable Milton Gregg, winner of the Victoria Cross, spoke about the vital role of the Legion in Canadian society.
In your Legion Creed, you pledge yourselves to do everything you possibly can towards achieving a unity of purpose within Canada. In looking over your record since 1925, I find that you have worked together in the field of comradeship, in the field of service, in the field of education, in the field of recreation, and in the general field of public morale. You have proved it by your cooperative efforts in social responsibility within almost 2,000 communities within Canada.
When the Korean War ended in 1953, the Legion placed a greater importance on service work. 10 years later, the Legion had moved from solely veterans' concerns to integrating successfully into the social fabric of community life in Canada, with almost 280,000 members, always maintaining its mandate of veterans' welfare and remembrance. In 1960, the Governor-General of Canada, the first French-Canadian appointee, His Excellency Georges Vanier, helped the Canadian Legion be granted royal patronage from the Queen of England. As such, Vanier spoke eloquently about the impact of the Legion on Canadian society.
Wherever I went, I saw signs of the Legion's continuing contribution to the awareness and well-being of the community. In many places, a proud and smart guard of honor was in attendance. I found the Legion halls occupying prominent positions in our cities and providing a center for programs of community development that have become the mark of the Legion. This, then, is the Legion's greatest role: to bring to remembrance those who died, to bring a living reality, the ideal for which they died.
It's very important to have good instincts and fine intentions translated into concrete institutional forms so that the organizational effort can go forward. And those good thoughts, those remembrances that are important, don't simply stay in the head, but they get translated into vehicles that permit the entire population to be engaged. And so the Legion is a crystallization of those intentions, that remembrance, that looking forward, and one needs a powerful organization to do just that. The great thing about the Legion is there's so many members across the country in virtually every community of any size across the country, so it really is from coast to coast to coast.
After having successfully increased its membership past the 500,000 mark during the last quarter of the 20th century, the Legion continues to adapt itself to a new era of peacekeeping, peacemaking, and combat operations. The recent conflict in Afghanistan generated a decade of combat veterans who can now profit from the Legion's vast experience and knowledge dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder and rehabilitation.
The Legion to me is the part that's not very well understood by the public. It is the day-to-day, the service bureau activity, helping a veteran, get what is due to him or her. from what the government promised, back into the early days of World War I. The stuff that the Legion fought for all those years. That's one thing. The second thing is the community level. Today it might be a Tim Hortons that supports your amateur hockey team, but those things were put in place by the Legion.
The Legion's regional impact as a pivotal community leader across the prairies and in isolated rural areas of eastern and western Canada cannot be underestimated as well. Annual remembrance ceremonies, history and heritage campaigns, battlefield tours, and poppy campaigns are all the true staple of the Royal Canadian Legion, dating back to its original foundation at the end of the Great War as the Guardian of Remembrance.
The Legion means to me comradeship. I know it's a cliche, maybe that what we say, but it really is a group of people who have served and who care about those who have served and help others who have served and are still serving. It's like a family. You can reach out to anybody across the country at any one of our service bureaus, and somebody is there to help.